Everyone knows about imposter syndrome. What people don't chat about as much is what I call social mobility guilt. So this is the kind of feeling that as you're moving to a different pathway in life, you're kind of upheaving yourself from your roots and the kind of social connections that made you who you are, who formed your identity.
Welcome to Mad Influence, a podcast about the power of influence and what happens when people choose to use it for good. I'm Helen Saul, and after a decade in marketing, I've seen how influence can be used for good, bad, and everything in between. In this series, I meet founders, campaigners, and creatives who are choosing to use their platforms to make a meaningful impact, to understand how ideas spread, create connection, and drive change. Today's guest is Joe Seddon, founder and CEO of tech startup Zero Gravity, which accelerates students from low opportunity backgrounds into top universities and careers. Joe built Zero Gravity from his bedroom with the last £200 of his student loan, and has since supported over 15,000 students into top institutions, more than doubling their chances of securing offers and high-impact career roles. His work has earned him a place on Forbes 30 Under 30 list, a Social Impact Award from the Prime Minister, and a British Empire Medal from King Charles. Zero Gravity has now deployed millions in scholarships for low-income students and partners with organisations like HSBC, KPMG and Rolls-Royce. In Joe's own words, talent is everywhere but opportunity is not. Our job is to close that gap. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Joe. I really appreciate you being here.
It's great to be on the podcast, Helen.
Thank you. I also think it's important to say that I have a personal interest in this topic that we're going to talk about today. I, like over 90% of the population, was educated in a state school. I applied to get into Oxford, did an interview, and I wasn't successful. And more than that, I just don't really know of anyone in my circle, friends, family, who ever was successful in getting into Oxbridge after going to a state school. And I know that obviously it's possible. You're a good example of that. So I'm really interested to get into that topic with you. And I think to really help understand exactly what your organisation does, it would be great to understand, if I was in that position today, if I was a student and I was thinking about applying to Oxbridge or something like that, what things from your app or your website would be available to me to help me in that journey?
Sure. So ultimately, Zero Gravity is a tech platform that powers students from low opportunity backgrounds into top universities and careers. And the way we do that is we spot talent when it's still at school. Now, there's tens, even hundreds of thousands of young people across the country who are currently still at school, who have huge potential, but because they live in areas with very little opportunity, maybe grew up in families where no one's gone to an elite university or worked in a professional occupation, they don't know what the full expanse of opportunity looks like in the UK. So the first thing we do is we actually spot those students. We give them the sort of proverbial tap on the shoulder and say, we think you're someone with absolutely incredible potential, and we want to be the organisation that comes along with you for the journey to help you land that future that you didn't think was possible. And the way we'll do that is not by forcing you to sort of catch the bus to a physical location, but we'll do it by being the always-on app in your pocket that you can tap into at any point. And that's a key thing about Zero Gravity. It's built for the kind of Gen Z, Gen Alpha communities. And that's really important because most traditional ways of solving this problem, whether pioneered by government, companies, universities or schools, have always been kind of physical, on-the-ground initiatives which disproportionately benefit people living in urban areas who can actually get to the physical locations where these things are based. And I grew up in a small suburban town called Morley in the UK. Now, I never had top employers at top universities. They're coming down to my school. Now, there wasn't a kind of plethora of internship opportunities on my doorstep. So having something digital in your pocket is the real difference maker. And it's why I've been building this for the past 7 years now.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned there that the first step is also identifying students with potential, and I believe you use an algorithm to do that. Could you talk a bit more about that?
Sure. So there's two kind of questions that we're trying to solve. The first is, how do you measure how disadvantaged someone is? Now, that is not an easy thing to do. People's lives are complicated and nuanced. And currently, the way that a lot of employers and universities look at this, is very, very crude. They'll ask you basic questions like, were you on free school meals at school, or what professional occupation did your sort of highest earning parent do? And I know to give you a little bit of a steer, but it's not the full picture. So what we've built is a algorithm that extracts lots of different data points about a student, essentially sort of compiles them, indexes them to put every student on a kind of scale between 0 to 100 of where we think they are in the kind of spectrum of opportunity in the UK. And we work with students in the bottom 40%. And the reason we do that is, when you look at students across that entire group, very, very few of them are getting into these top universities and careers. It's not just the ones who are like really, really disadvantaged in the bottom 10% who are struggling. It's actually that entire group. So the sort of typical zero gravity member ranges all the way from someone who might have grown up in a council block tower in kind of inner city London versus someone living in a rural area of the UK in a kind of small sleepy town where the sort of closest city is maybe 2 hours away on the train. So the other question we try to answer is, who are these people who've got extraordinary potential who are currently being missed in the state education system? And the way we do that is essentially we look at people's academic performance and we benchmark it versus what you'd expect that person to achieve given the context of their background. And we sort of look for people who kind of performing well above what you'd expect, because we're not a mass market product. We're not the products that's going to take the person who's completely failing their maths GCSE, maybe has behavioural problems at school, and get them to pass. That's not us. That's not where we're focusing. We're focusing on getting people into those top universities and careers. So we're looking for those kind of statistical outperformers who are already showing that they've got potential, but maybe they just don't realise it themselves. And maybe their school and parents don't realise it either. And that is our kind of sweet spot. So people in the bottom 40% of disadvantage, but have shown that outperformance. That is zero gravity member through and through.
That's really interesting, and especially to hear that it's not a blunt approach and it is really aimed at getting a real range of people to have access to these types of opportunities. I wondered how this relates to your own motivation, and if you could take me back a little bit to how you got into these institutions and how, once you were there and about to graduate, decided from your own experiences you wanted to increase other people's opportunities by setting this app up.
Exactly. The way I sort of relate it to my own story is when you look at people's backgrounds, I think there's four key things that usually make the difference in terms of whether someone's able to sort of progress into a top university and elite career or not. One is income. That the brutal reality is that money is the kind of oil that greases the wheels throughout someone's entire life. And being from a family that is high income, where your parents can pay for things like tutors, extracurricular opportunities, living in a more affluent area, that all compounds and makes a big difference over time. So that is a key one. Another is geography. If you live in a kind of big city, it's far easier to be socially mobile than if you live in a sort of small suburban or rural town. And when you look at even low-income students in London, they tend to outperform academically the vast majority of the socioeconomic spectrum in the rest of the country. So it's a big advantage living in a big city. The third thing that really matters is schooling. Do you go to a kind of private school, a state school? And if you do go to a state school, how good is that school? I mean, the fourth thing that matters is parenting. Are your parents kind of building that education culture at home? Are they able to help facilitate opportunities for you? And when I look back at my own upbringing, now I grew up in a sort of small suburban post-industrial town. There was very little opportunities on my doorstep. And I grew up in a kind of family where the single parent backgrounds, there was financial anxiety growing up. So on the kind of income and geography points, I had some challenges to overcome. But on the schooling point, I was lucky insofar as I always went to state schools, but the secondary school I went to was a grammar school. And my mum put in the effort to help sort of tutor me to do the 11 plus style test, because we couldn't afford to pay for sort of expensive private tutors. But my mum used to sit down as a single parent every evening when I was in my final year of primary school and help me do these really tedious tests. So on the kind of schooling and parenting, I had some unlocks there, which it's easy to take for granted at the time. But when I look back at my journey, those were the things that really enabled me to progress. And I think that's what sort of put me on the route to getting into Oxford University, where even though that was something that was very much a kind of outlier thing to do, for people from the area I grew up in. Not a single person from a parliamentary constituency in which I grew up got a place at Oxford in the year I graduated. So even though I was an outlier, it wouldn't have been possible had my mum not sort of steered me on the right sort of kind of path. When I look at what we're trying to do with zero gravity, we're trying to take the kind of arbitrariness out of the equation. So people, no matter their income backgrounds, no matter where they live, no matter what school they go to, no matter how much kind of educational help they get in their home setting, we're trying to level that playing field. So if you are someone who is talented and ambition, we're here for you to make that a reality.
Yeah, really interesting to hear you talk about that, and especially the image of you sitting down with your mum helping you out in terms of trying to prep you to get into this school. And it made me wonder about her reaction to the path and where you are now. And certainly when I was reading out the introduction, like, you've had so many accolades and recognition that are incredible for the work you've done. I also imagine initially when you started it out, it was not a known path, right? So I'm curious to know how she supported you and other friends and family as well on this journey.
I think one of the things that's really difficult about being someone who's socially mobile is that everyone knows about imposter syndrome. So the idea that when you step into a institution that other people like you haven't tended to preoccupy, that can feel incredibly intimidating. You don't feel like you fit in. You feel a bit like you're a kind of faker, a chancer who must have cheated the system in some way. Everyone knows about that phenomenon. What people don't chat about as much is what I call social mobility guilt. So this is the kind of feeling that as you're kind of moving to a different pathway in life, you're kind of upheaving yourself from your roots and the kind of social connections that made you who you are, who formed your identity. And I definitely felt that to some degree, which is, when I got into Oxford University, that was a life-changing moment for me personally. That unlocked the door of opportunity in my life, but also by moving from a suburban town in the north to a very affluent city in the south, and sort of going from walking through Morley town centre to walking through the kind of dreaming spires of Oxford, changed me as a person at the end of the day. And my friends and family, I suppose, didn't fully understand it. People would sort of joke that you're going down south to be with all the poshos, and you're going to become part of like the Bullingdon Club and stuff like that. And even though it was tongue in cheek, I think there was a real sentiment that underpins it, which is, be careful, you could potentially lose sight of who you are. I think that is an identity problem I've seen consistently across a lot of zero gravity members, where it's not just about the feeling of not fitting in where they're going, but also about being increasingly dislocated from where they've come from. And that is really difficult to grapple with as a young person, when just by the sort of process of growing up, you're also dealing with all these existential questions regarding identity. I think how you reconcile that over time is by accepting that your interests are going to evolve, your network is going to evolve. That's a natural process of growing up. But your fundamental values, those are the things that you need to try and work out what they are and stay true to those. If you start radically changing your values over time, I think that's when you start to lose sight of your kind of common sense of identity and heritage. So as I've kind of progressed through life into Oxford University and then into this kind of crazy London startup ecosystem, I still try to keep true to those kind of fundamental northern values that I suppose make me who I am.
Yeah, that's really good to hear that. And yeah, really interesting to hear you describing it's kind of like jokes that people make, but maybe there's an element of truth in there as well. And I think you get it both ways as well, from when you leave the north to go to the south, and then equally when you're in the south, you still get those jokes as well. And a lot of the time it is tongue in cheek, but also sometimes it's a sense of like, there is a difference here that we're highlighting. Is that part of then what makes you, is it a sense of, in addition to, you described wanting to keep your values, is part of it also wanting to ground yourself in people from similar backgrounds to you, maybe people with less opportunity, in order to retain that sense of connection to home?
Yeah, I was lucky that I found people at university who were very similar to myself, similar backgrounds. I think having that group is really important. But if you do go to a kind of highly selective university, those people are quite difficult to come by, and that's why zero gravity is so important. Where, like, if you put aside all the functional support we provide, just sort of building this community of people who are highly ambitious but come from these backgrounds sort of creates that almost like cultural tailwind behind people where they feel part of something bigger than themselves. They're in a community that are all kind of they're pulling each other up. And again, that sort of takes away the kind of luck factor of finding your people at university, because hopefully you'll always have your people through the Zero Gravity app, because it's been deliberately designed to identify people just like you. So that's something that we've put a lot of effort into. We've got over 40,000 Zero Gravity members on the app now. So we've got a huge amount of members. There's a huge amount of kind of shared traits, shared sense of kind of identity and journey amongst those people. But in real life, they would probably never come across each other because they just are situated in different geographical locations. And that's what the app really does change.
Yeah, that's great to hear, because I wonder if people might assume that it's an app that sort of only helps in the initial stages of like trying to get into a place, but it sounds like it's a network that can last you a very long time and give you that support once you're there and maybe feel like, do I fit in? And you're having these questions about trying to reconcile these different identities.
Yeah, we're trying to take people on a journey into uni, work, and life. So this isn't a kind of like one part of your journey. And we've had so many students now who've not just used Zero Gravity to get into their kind of first choice university, but have also used it to win their very first internship and also bag their graduate job as well. And that is beautiful to see, because that is the product vision coming to life in the real world. And that for me is transformative impact, because not only have you kind of steered someone's educational trajectory in a different direction, you've also made getting into the career of their dreams possible at the same time. And people often forget that step. It's all well and good to get someone to a highly selective university, but it's not the end of the road. If someone like me gets into Oxford, that does not in any way guarantee I'm going to get into a fantastic graduate career. You have to continue to support people on those next stages of the journey, especially nowadays where the sort of entry-level careers market is more competitive than ever before. So sort of being that sort of across time app rather than just a one-time, one-place intervention, I think is why our impact is so large, and why a lot of our members do kind of attribute their journey to us as well, which is really important from a brand point of view, because it creates that kind of, I suppose, organic user-generated content of people very authentically being able to say, Zero Gravity changed my life, which is a kind of marketer's dream. But for most products, it's really difficult to have people authentically say that, because very few products genuinely change people's lives at the end of the day.
Yeah, definitely. And I was going to ask you about impact actually, and how you translate it from the big numbers of we've helped 15,000 people to those individual stories. It sounds like you use user-generated content, which is a great way of showing an individual's experiences that feels very natural. Would you say, are there any individuals' experiences that stick out to you of a particular student you've met, or someone that really exemplifies what you're doing and how you are trying to even out the playing field a bit?
Yes, so many stories. I can give you one quick story of
Yeah.
a Zero Gravity member I was actually speaking to yesterday. So in the very first cohort of Zero members that we brought on the platform in 2018, 2019, there was a girl called Natalie Thomas who grew up in Milford Haven in Wales, and she wanted to study history at Oxford University. But that was a huge ambition that was really difficult to realise, because her parents hadn't been to university and no one in her school had been to Oxbridge before. So just a kind of ecosystem of support that was not set up there for success. She was identified by Zero Gravity and joined the app. Now, back in the days where we were only helping around 150 people per year. So she was one of the OG users, and she was connected with a mentor who mentored her through our app, and she managed to win a place at Oxford University. And then she graduated from university in 2023. But because she hadn't sort of received any kind of career support at university, and because she didn't have that big network of professionals in her life, she really struggled to get a graduate job. She wanted to work in the legal sector, but without the kind of access to work experience, the application support and advice, they're really difficult to get one of those coveted training contracts. So she actually, post-graduation, returned back to Milford Haven in Wales, and she was working in her local Tesco Express, applying to graduate jobs. That was just when Zero Gravity launched our kind of career offering, where we went beyond just getting students into university to then supporting them into internships and careers. And Natalie was one of the very first users of the careers part of our app, and she managed to use it to win a training contract essentially at a big American law firm called Perkins Coie. She was actually their number one employee that they hired in their new UK office that they opened. And she's now at Perkins. She's like their flagship employee. She's all over their social media accounts. She's won massive awards with them. And we've got a partnership with Perkins now where they've recruited tens of internships for us and multiple people into full-time jobs. So that's a great story, I think, of not just someone who used our app to get into university and then get into their first career, but then also has extended the ladder down because we're now partnering with that company who's hired multiple people through our app. So she's managed to extend the opportunity she was given to the next generation of zero gravity students. And that is the beauty that tech can achieve if it's built in the right way.
Yeah, I think that's an amazing example, and definitely makes me more curious about these partnerships that you have with big employers. Like, what was the first one that you ever secured? How did you manage to do that? And how do they work today?
So the first employer partner that we secured on a commercial basis was HSBC. So I signed them as a client for Zero Gravity, I think when I was 22 years old. I couldn't work out why the biggest bank in Britain wanted to partner with a company run by a sort of a very fresh-faced, inexperienced, naive 22-year-old at the time. But I was just lucky that I was able to be introduced there to their global head of talent, who was a guy who had been on a socially mobile journey himself, actually hadn't been to university, and he just got what I was trying to do. He took a risk and sort of, I suppose, put his personal reputation on the line to sort of have this huge global company partner with my tiny startup. And they were the ones who really kind of catalyzed everything and got the ball rolling. So we've got over 30 sort of enterprise size employees that we work with today. What I would say to sort of other founders is it takes time to get your first corporate customer, especially if you're selling to big companies with really complex sort of stakeholders and procurement and risk aversion. Really difficult to get your first company, but it is possible. Now, I managed to do it at the age of 22 with a massive UK company. So if you have the right product, if you're able to really sell the vision and solve an employer's problem, it is possible to get these big companies on board, even though it might feel like you're banging your head against a wall for 6 months before anything really happens.
Yeah, well, I think that in itself was an amazing achievement to do that so early on. In terms of how it works now, so does some of these employers sponsor places, or do they just have links in with Zero Gravity? How's exactly it work?
So ultimately, we partner with these sort of talent functions within these organizations. So the outcome they're trying to achieve is recruiting the top talent from more diverse backgrounds than they've traditionally been able to achieve themselves. So that they use our platform to essentially try and attract zero gravity members to apply for their job roles, and then to provide them with a kind of ongoing support through the recruitment system, because we know statistically students from low income backgrounds are more likely to kind of fail in these competitive employee recruitment systems due to a lack of the kind of inside track. So that's what we ultimately do. What we're measured on, ultimately, do these employers actually hire our members or not? Which I think is the right incentive to create, because our commercials are directly tied to our ability to generate social impact. If we're not actually getting people in the door, then these companies don't want to work with us, which I think creates that really positive feedback loop in terms of making sure we're focusing on actually doing the things that move the needle for students getting into these professions. So we've had so many companies now who've hired tens of zero gravity members. And what's exciting about that is it's actually starting to meaningfully shift the demographic at some of these companies. It only takes sort of changing your hiring cohort by 10-15% a year to start to sort of shift the culture. But we've managed to prove that in pockets, but I'm really passionate about how do we do this across every single industry sector in the UK economy, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because I think firms are currently missing out on so much talent that if they were able to reach and recruit, would be transformative in terms of the long term of their businesses. And that's what we're trying to help them achieve.
Yeah, definitely. And when we're talking about recruiting this talent and shifting the demographic, it makes me think as well about location. Now, you and I are both from the north of England. We both moved to London, certainly in my case, to further my career, and sounds like possibly for you too, based on what we discussed before we started recording. You mentioned earlier that if you're from a lower income background but you're in London, you're still more likely to potentially get opportunities. And I think part of that is to do with the fact that if you have a family that can support you by essentially covering the rent costs because you live with them, that makes you available to these internships and big opportunities. And I wondered if you think there's a role that location plays in it. A lot of these employers are based in London. A lot of them are starting to go back to mandating office time in London. Do you have any thoughts on that? Do you think that we should be more open to remote roles or trying to push more opportunities in other places in the UK as well? Really curious to get your take on that.
It makes a massive difference. The Social Mobility Commission essentially look at how high social mobility is in different areas of the country. And in their most latest report, out of the top 30 places for social mobility, 28 of them were London boroughs. So that tells you a very clear story, which is, life in London can be really hard. The cost of living is high. There's big issues with crime here. But the expanse of opportunity here is on a completely different scale. And the brutal reality is for socially mobile students is I think you have to move to where the opportunity is. That is not a world which I think is great for the opportunity talent, but it is the world that we live in. And what we've seen over the past 10 years is that the growth of graduate employment in London has roughly tracked the growth in the number of students, but the level of graduate jobs in the rest of the country has essentially been stagnant for the past 10, 20 years. So as more people have graduated in these other sort of cities and towns in the UK, there hasn't been an increasing number of graduate jobs for them. So we've not just got a kind of graduate unemployment crisis, but the bigger story is actually the underemployment crisis, which we've got all these people who've done degrees but aren't in graduate level employment because they live in areas where there just isn't enough opportunity to go around. So my kind of brutal message to socially mobile students would be, if you want to get on, you do have to consider geographic mobility. And it may just be the case that the place that you live doesn't have enough opportunity to facilitate the future that you want. And that is a big choice, because I know there's huge personal costs with moving, uprooting yourself from your family, your friendship network, maybe you've got a romantic partner. And this is the cost of social mobility in the UK, that the trade-off between economic opportunity and kind of social cohesiveness. And that's why social mobility can often feel a bit like a lonely journey. So you've got to make the decision that you think's right for you. It's completely fine to say, actually, I don't want to be massively economically mobile. I'd rather kind of maintain my roots where I live. But just know what you're sort of stepping into would be my sort of guidance.
Yeah, and do you think that there's any role for the employers and institutions as well to be considering location? So, a big corporate firm in London, do you think they have any responsibility to consider employing people outside of that city?
I think, but putting aside the moral question of whether they've got responsibility or not, ultimately everything comes back to incentives. And employers want to employ people in companies to deliver a service that makes a profit for shareholders. I know that sounds very theoretical, but that is the ultimate incentive structure behind every single company in the UK. So if you want employers to move to different areas, you have to find some way to incentivize them to do so within that structure. One way you can do that is by making the argument that they're missing out on incredible talent. Another way is also just cost as well. We've seen a lot of our London-based and American-based companies that we work with are starting to open up new offices in places like Birmingham, in Glasgow in the UK, because the cost of hiring someone now in those cities is very cheap compared to the average salary of a worker, for instance, living in New York or Texas. Now, when you compare the salaries, it's over 50% lower in a lot of locations in the UK. So we've seen a lot of the banks and law firms in particular opening up satellite offices in these areas, but that's quite depressing in a way, because that's been driven by cost. So if you want to make things happen with employers, you've got to put aside the morals and work out how to incentivize them. And we haven't done that anywhere near well enough as a country in the long term. I think the other thing that's related to that though is transport. If it's inevitable that employers are going to want to like locate themselves in kind of high productivity cities, the key thing that matters is the transport links into those cities. Again, that's something that London does really, really well. London is a city of 8 million people, but literally the expanse of London, those spreads out so much. And you've got people commuting in from even places on like the Essex border, Surrey, Kent. Like the transport ecosystem means that there's over 10 million people in the southeast of England who can connect into that opportunity hub that is London. That is not the case in most other cities in the UK. And for instance, where I grew up, that outside Leeds, it may take you over an hour to be able to get into a job in Leeds city centre. And that's not great for opportunity if the natural economic incentives mean employers are always going to locate themselves in urban hubs, which I think is the case.
Yeah, I think what's clear from what you've described is it is a complex series of different factors that is all laddering up to people's opportunities. And to bring it back into the tangible point at which you are really helping that opportunity, I know that there's so much that we could talk about in your career and things that you've done, and you've achieved some really amazing things. And I wondered, out of all of them, if there's a specific one that you're really proud of.
I think the accolades, to be honest, I kind of see as brand marketing, which is really useful in terms of like building your brand equity and credibility. Really matters in terms of institutional partnering, but ultimately they're sort of PR stuff. So I don't read too much into them from an impact point of view. I think the thing I'm most proud of is seeing those kind of data points come to life in terms of when you meet the people behind the data, and they're the student who's been the kind of person you've tracked on the platform. You've seen them when they signed up, when they activated their account, when they're engaging week to week. When you actually meet them in real life and you're like, wow, this person has used your platform for the past 2 or 3 years and it's helped unlock multiple stages of their journey. That's the thing that gives you the kind of warm, fuzzy feeling in your stomach. So that's the thing that keeps me and the team going, I think.
Yeah. And it sounds like when you say the team, you have, is it a team of about 30 people now?
Yeah, we've got 25 in the UK and then 5 abroad.
Yeah, so it's a really big team in terms of where you look. You started out, I think, by yourself about 7 years ago, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how have you managed that scale of growth in such a relatively short space of time?
We didn't all come at once. Now, I started Zero Gravity from my student bedroom back in the day. I was a one-man band for over a year, doing everything myself on not just a tight budget, but in a scenario where I wasn't able to pay myself a salary. And I took huge personal financial risks to try and get through that hump before I was able to kind of professionalize what I was doing and sort of raise investment and generate revenue. And that kind of key stage of going from bedroom startup to I suppose, nationally renowned organization happened with a very, very small team of 3 or 4 people, which I think just shows it is possible to build a very lean startup that can kind of disrupt the status quo and make an outsized impact without needing a huge amount of resource. And that was possible back in 2018. It's even more possible today with AI. But nowadays, we've got people who work in product, software engineering, growth, sales. It really is a kind of big sort of organization to make all the magic happen. And that's been a kind of journey of discovery for me, because I never started out wanting to be a kind of professional CEO or manager. Now, I was a founder and I wanted to build things and build products. I wasn't as interested, I suppose, in things like how do you recruit the right talent and motivate them and build the right culture and set incentives. And these are all the things I've had to learn over time, because when you start to hire a big group of people, your ability to get results through others starts to matter far more than your own individual performance. And that was a big learning curve for me, but is a difference maker nowadays in terms of whether we're able to achieve the full extent of our goals or not.
Yeah. Do you think, is there a specific moment that you can think of where it sort of really hit that this had gone from that initial idea in your student bedroom using £200 student loan to feeling like a real, genuine thing that had real potential?
I can't remember the exact day this happened, but I do remember there was one day in the back end of 2022, and I'd been feeling sick in the morning. And like a typical founder, I was sort of feeling angst about the idea of not working. Is the world going to collapse if I sort of spend a few hours in bed? I remember I just sort of spent a few hours in bed in the morning, trying to recover, felt a little bit better in the afternoon. And I came into the office and walked in, and there was just like 20 odd people there, buzzing around, doing stuff without my presence. And that was a kind of like wake up call for me. It's like, wow, like there's things happening now without me having to be there constantly kind of agitating and pushing stuff. And as a founder, even when you get to our size, you do have to be that person who's still providing the impetus. But that was a wake up call for me of, oh, this is real now. There's stuff happening when I'm not in the room. And that is, I suppose, a real company at the end of the day. So I just remember walking on that morning reflecting. I was like, wow, this is very different from when I was just in the bedroom by myself.
Yeah, that must have really felt like, just looking at all the team that you've helped create and just seeing them all around, it really kind of showcase exactly what you've built. I wondered as well, just hearing you talk about being a founder, and obviously we've talked a lot about opportunity, and it made me consider, do you think there's also an opportunity gap in when you're becoming a founder? Because when I look at the types of people that become founders, it's often people that might have lots of money behind them. It sounds like you didn't have that initial investment. Is there an opportunity gap there as well when you're the type of person that is able to say, I'm not going to go down the traditional route, I'm going to found something?
Yeah, I suppose it depends what you mean by a founder. Like, there's a lot of people from working class backgrounds in the UK who are self-employed. And I think your sort of traditional uh, sort of no bricklayer company, or the person who comes to do up your house. But when it comes to the kind of, I suppose, tech startup ecosystem that people associate now with the word founder, that is about the most socioeconomically skewed industry you can find. Now, when you look at the numbers, there's a report that was done by Sifted in the UK, which is an offshoot of the Financial Times, and they found that only around 10% of founders who've raised investment for their company originally come from working class backgrounds, compared to around 40% of the country. So it's one of the most socioeconomically exclusive professions, even more so than things like banking, law, politics, media, the professions people usually associate with privilege. And the reason for that is because entrepreneurship at the early stages is very heavily dependent on network. Like, being able to raise your very first funding round is literally called in the jargon a friends and family funding round. That the kind of implicit idea is you're able to raise a small amount of capital from people in your immediate network. That wasn't a possibility for someone like me. If I did a whip around of my friends and family, I might be able to raise 50 quid, but certainly not £50,000. I think we're missing out on a lot of incredible founders because of that lack of network. I mean, how that shapes people's ambitions and their ideas about what they can do. I hope my story has also inspired people from more normal backgrounds to think that they can build a business from the ground up. You can defy the odds. It's going to be harder for you, but it is possible to succeed. And even more so nowadays, where I genuinely believe that AI, even though it's going to create some real social problems and disruption, I think when it comes to startups and entrepreneurship, it's a huge boon. It's now possible to build something meaningful far quicker. And that means that if you're that entrepreneur sat in your bedroom like I was 7 years ago, your odds of success have now dramatically increased.
Yeah, definitely. I think it is really going to accelerate and remove a lot of those barriers, even like a small thing. So I last did this podcast about 5 years ago, and the advances in technology from 5 years ago to now, because of AI, means that all of the costs and things associated with editing and creating social cut downs, that type of things, are essentially eradicated, which massively lowers the barrier to entry. So I think that's a really important point to pick up on, as well as what you said about you hope that you've inspired people, seeing people like you. And I do think that's really important to have role models that remind you of yourself in a way. And I just wondered if there's anyone anyone or anything actually that you can look back on and say they influenced you in some way to help get you where you are today?
I think there's three people that I would definitely pinpoint. The obvious one is my mum. My journey wouldn't have been possible without her there at the beginning, and she shaped so much in terms of my values earlier in life. And then when I sort of stepped into the startup ecosystem, there was a guy called Bill Westwater who was the first investor in Zero Gravity. He invested £100,000 of his own money to sort of get the business up and running. And he not only took a chance on me as a young person, but also mentored me as a young founder. And he previously built a company that he'd scaled from a university laboratory into a publicly listed company in the UK. And he sort of took me under his wing and worked really closely with me to sort of shape me into the founder I am today. And then the other person is actually the current chair of the Zero Gravity board, who's a guy called Mike Lonergan, who again has been with Zero Gravity right from the outset of the journey. He was based originally in Hong Kong and was 8 hours away in time zone, but was constantly checking in with me. He was also one of the very first investors in the organisation, has gone on to be the biggest investor over time. And without his support across the journey, not just in terms of the financial investment, but the kind of moral support of having that person there, guiding your journey, motivating you, telling you can do it, none of this would have been possible. I'm very lucky to have had those mentors in my life. So my sort of piece of advice to founders would be really try and lean in to the relationships with people who care about you and your mission. A lot of founders are kind of quite skittish in their approach, and they're constantly jumping from one thing to another, and that is somewhat inevitable when you're trying to build a business at pace. But you've got to work out who your people are early in your journey, and if you get those people right, that they really, really can be the difference maker on your journey, and that made all the difference to me.
Yeah, really good to hear about those three role models for you. We're coming close to ending the podcast now. So is there anything that you feel that you would have liked to have talked about today that I haven't asked you, or anything that you wanted to cover?
I don't think so. There's a million different things we can talk about. I suppose one of the big things that is affecting a lot of our members is how AI is starting to transform not just the education system, but also those early career opportunities. I think that is something that is starting to become a really, really big societal question of how do we ensure that people can upskill and grow in their roles in a world in which there might be far less entry level employment? Now, that is a massive question for us to answer as a society. I mean, the second big question is also what does learning look like in this new age? Like the education system hasn't really changed very much fundamentally over the past century. Like, okay, a teacher might stand in front of an interactive whiteboard nowadays rather than a kind of chalkboard. But the way of teaching, the kind of pedagogy, the kind of classroom setup, it's very similar to our grandparents' generation. But the AI now is making it possible finally to realise that once utopian vision of how do you create a kind of high quality personalised learning experience for every student. So these are the two big questions that I think are going to dominate the social mobility narrative over the next decade, and they're the ones that we're trying to bring an answer to.
You described some positives about AI there in terms of making the learning experience more personalised and accessible to everybody. Do you just see it as positive? Do you think there are risks as well? Where do you sit on that balance?
I think in the education system, it could be a huge positive. Like we live in a world at the moment where there's a huge attainment gap between state schools and private schools, but also good state schools and bad state schools. That attainment gap explains around 71% of the difference in economic outcomes between high income people and low income people. So if AI really can deliver that highly personalized, high quality learning experience that levels the playing field, that will be a huge leveler for social mobility, not just in the UK, but every advanced economy. So on that, I'm bullish. I don't think it's inevitable it's going to happen. I think we've got to work really hard to build these great products and make sure that they're widely accessed. But I think there's more room for optimism there. Where I'm more pessimistic is on the early year employment side of the equation, which is I do think we're going to see significant structural unemployment across the advanced economies in professions which are highly exposed to AI automation, but particularly in early career job roles. And we need to answer the question of what we're going to do about that to ensure that the ladder doesn't get completely cut off at the bottom, because we are going to need the next generation of people to eventually step into these mid-level and senior roles. But I think every business is probably going to have an incentive in the short term to find those efficiencies by cutting them. Like you said, the video editor that you might have employed 5 years ago to edit your videos and create the shorts, you can now use a great piece of AI software to do that at 5% of the cost in probably 5 times the speed. So every business in the UK, from big to small, has that same incentive structure that you've got personally. So I think we are going to see a lot of these jobs go, but the question is, what is the system of opportunity that's going to replace it? So that's where I'm more pessimistic at the moment. So I don't think anyone has a clear answer to how we're going to make sure this isn't a kind of disaster for the next generation of young people coming out of school and university.
Yeah, I wonder if a small part of the solution is that a lot of employers are also going to be directly recruiting people that have the skills and knowledge of how to use AI well. And be looking, certainly, I hire people as well in my role. And if you see that someone has those skills, that is one small way that you can make yourself stand out in a recruitment process.
I think AI literacy is going to be really, really important. My pushback would be, I don't think the level of AI literacy amongst the average young person is that much higher than the level of AI literacy amongst the 30 or 40-year-olds. And the 30 or 40-year-olds are going to be the people making these economic decisions in organizations over the next decade. So in some ways, it's an advantage that Gen Z and Gen Alpha are digital native, but actually, in most professional occupations now, people are starting to adopt AI pretty quickly. And the people who are the mid-level and senior employees already have the huge advantage of the understanding sort of complex workflows you have in these organizations and having the kind of ability to make judgments because they've seen it all before. And that's what young people are really missing. So yes, we can sort of mitigate the problem by increasing AI literacy, but I do think we are just going to see a massive shrinkage of opportunity. As we've been speaking about today, we've already seen that in the country outside London and the effects that has had. We're potentially going to see that come to the London economy as well. So it's a big, big question for organisations. How do they want to invest in the next generation of young people where the work that those people traditionally would have done may no longer exist in 5 to 10 years' time?
Yeah, definitely. And to close off on a more optimistic question, when you look forward to the future, what things are you most looking forward to?
I think the thing that excites me is just the sense of scale. When I first started, we were supporting around 150 students per year. It's now gone up to 13,000 students per year come through our platform into university. So we've managed to kind of go on an exponential curve in terms of the number of people we support, and we want to continue doing that. And what's exciting about that is behind every data point is a real human being who deeply cares about their own future. And if we can just play a small part in making their potential a reality, then that's a very exciting thing to do for potentially hundreds of thousands of people.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much for your time today. If anybody wants to either find you or your app, where would you like to direct them to?
So it's zerogravity.co.uk. And if you're a budding entrepreneur and you want to find out a bit more about how to build something from nothing, then feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Joe. It's been great talking to you.
You too, Helen. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you for listening to Mad Influence. This is the part of the episode where podcasters tend to ask you to subscribe and most people don't bother, but I would really appreciate it if you could do, because it sends a signal to the platforms to say that the content is good, more people get to see it, and we get to grow the podcast and invite more guests on in the future. So if you could press follow or subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to or watching this podcast, I would really appreciate it.